Back up. You're on, Don.
Thank you, Stephen. Hi, everybody. My name's Don, and I'm an alcoholic. And I very much appreciate being invited here. And Stephen, I appreciate all that you're doing to. Sounds like you're kind of a 12-step whirlwind down there in Kingston, Bristol. So I appreciate all that, and I appreciate all you folks here. Of course, at my age, I'm grateful to be anywhere, much less an AA meeting. My sobriety date's April the 9th of 1981. And my home group is the Calm Down group, across the Ohio River from downtown Louisville, Kentucky, which is where I live. And some other folks and I started that group 35 years or so ago. And I named it because it meets on Wednesday. And particularly back then, by Wednesday, I really needed to calm down. Sponsoring people in Alcoholics Anonymous has been the center of my life for over 40 years. In the last 40 years, I have spent considerably more time working with people one-on-one in AA and traveling and speaking for AA and doing what I was asked to do. Then I have spent doing my job, which is practicing law. And God has taken care of me just fine. It's worked out beautifully. I'm a fellow who cannot fit AA into my life. I tried that unsuccessfully many times. And to tell you the truth, I don't see a whole lot of alcoholics of my type who can be successful at fitting AA into their lives. What I have to do is fit my life into Alcoholics Anonymous and let everything else fall in place around that. And that works for me real well. My sponsor is Bob B. from St. Paul, Minnesota. I was with Bob yesterday. He was visiting, and we were talking about the fact that our stories change over years and need to change because things that happened 40 years ago or 50 years ago are not as impactful to today's young folks as things that are more recent. But that doesn't change the fact that, as far as I know, we've got two sets of directions on giving AA talks. Of course, we read one every time we read how it works, and that's in a general way what I was like and what happened and what I'm like now. And the other set of directions we don't talk about nearly as much, but it's really, really dear to me. It says words to the effect that our personal stories tell in our own language and from our own point of view how we've been able to form a relationship with our Creator. And I really hope my story carries that. I was actually born and grew up on a tobacco farm in southwestern Kentucky, right on the Tennessee line. And tell you one of those, I don't know whether I was born an alcoholic or not, and I no longer care about things like that. But I'll tell you a couple of little things about my childhood that caused me to suspect that there was a little something off key from the very beginning. I've got a distinct memory. There was a little Baptist church about a half mile down the road from our farm, Locust Grove. And I've got a distinct memory of sitting in there at 4 years old at Christmas time, still believing in Santa Claus and not buying a single word that preacher was saying. And where that came from, I have no idea in the world. And then the first day when I was 6 years old, the first day of the second grade, I went into the principal of the grade school and said, Miss Fanny, I have been in a car wreck over the summer and have brain damage and won't be expected to do as well as I did last year. I knew I'd set the bar too high. And Miss Fanny laughed about that the rest of her life. So I don't know whether it was an alcoholic or not, but I know that something's off key. And main thing about my childhood is it wasn't a thing like I thought it was. My capacity for self-delusion is absolutely astounding. And until I got sober at 37 years old, and it's hard for me to believe I was ever 37, much less you believe it. But when I got sober, until I got sober at 37, I had about the most romantic and interesting saga of my early struggles and subsequent rise to power that you've ever heard in your life. And it was all about how by my iron will and my sterling intellect, I had pulled myself up by the bootstraps from the depths of poverty to those staggering heights I'd reached in life. And I believed it so sincerely, I'd have us both crying before I got done telling it. And I don't think I was honestly sober a week until I realized what a load of baloney. We weren't even poor. We weren't anywhere close to poor. We were middle-class farming people who had everything we needed and most of the things we wanted. We were actually better off than anybody else in the community. And those staggering heights I was so sure I'd reached turned out to be a whole lot more staggering than they were high. What was really going on the first 12 or 13 years of my life is the same thing that's going on today. It's my ego disorder. The big book says selfishness and self-centeredness is the root of our troubles, and that's my ego disorder. Without divine intervention, I am so obsessed with myself. I'm so obsessed with what you think of me, how I compare to other people. I'm so obsessed with how I feel that for many years I've boiled the bedrock of my alcoholism, where it starts, down to the ego disorder with one sentence intertwined in it. Very simple sentence. Without divine intervention, I will always wind up letting how I feel be the most important thing in the world to me. Now, without divine intervention, I can give lip service to something being more important. I might be able to play out a charade for a little while, but if I haven't done the work I need to do today in order to maintain my spiritual condition, I'll go right back to my default position, which is to let how I feel be the most important thing in the world to me. Included in that obsession with myself is that I'm an egomaniac with an inferiority complex. And what I mean by that is I've always been perfectly capable of feeling too good for something or somebody, and at the same time knowing I'm not nearly good enough for that same thing or that same person. All my life I've known I could do anything. And at the same time I've known I couldn't really do anything. And that's been bouncing around between these ears for 48 years now. Let me be clear that for the last for 78 years, rather, let me be clear that for the last 41 years, you folks who are the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12 steps, which are the only program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the loving higher power that you were babbling about when I got here, fill up the emptiness that self-obsession brings. It fills up the pain that it causes. It fills up the difference and the apartness that it causes. But without something, without divine intervention or something, I don't have a single peer on the face of this earth. I can be above you, I can be below you, and insanely, I can be both at the same time. But what I cannot be without something is a fellow among fellows. Just okay with you and okay with me. That's the mess I brought my first drunk when I was 12 or 13. That first night I got in a world of trouble. I puked, I blacked out, I passed out, woke up the next morning way sicker than I'd ever been in my life. and far more terrified than I'd ever been in my life. The four horsemen had already found me that morning. And I laid there wondering whether I would live or not. And one thing was clear. All those Baptists around the farm there, and for those of you that are not from the South, Southern Baptists don't believe in drinking. It was clear to me that morning that they were still wrong about everything else. But even a blind hog will stumble across an acorn every once in a while. And they were right about the booze. And being an intelligent young fellow like I was, I would never, ever pick up that crap and start that nightmare over again. And I was as serious as I could be. And was kind of effective because it was nearly a week until I got drunk the second time. And I got drunk the second time. That the way things were going to go for 25 years, that was a near miracle. I got drunk the second time for the exact same reason I got drunk the other thousands of times. When I'd gotten enough of that booze in me for the first time in my life, I felt good enough inside myself that I could stand it without running and or trying to stuff anything else in there to make me feel good enough I could stand it. For the first time in my life, I had peers. I was a fellow among fellows. Now remember that the way I feel is the most important thing in the world without divine intervention. And for the 25 years following that first drunk, there was literally nothing I was less interested in than divine intervention. So as far as I was concerned, the alcohol and in the latter years, some sideshows, things like it, were, as far as I knew, the only game in town, the only way to feel the way that I wanted to feel. So my powerlessness over alcohol is sociopathically and tragically simple. When I wanted to change the way I felt, it didn't matter what it cost, and it didn't matter who it cost, because the way I felt was the most important thing in this universe to me. I was blessed with academic talent from that first drunk until I was 16. I was drunk 2 or 3 nights a week, still holding on to things that are important to a kid, like grades and popularity, by my fingernails. But I could feel the bricks and rocks falling all around me, and I knew why they were falling. I knew it was from drinking. No consideration of moderating or stopping, just time to get out of Dodge. So I got on a Greyhound bus in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. It's about 13 miles from the farm, and went 200 miles up to Louisville, and kicked around for a couple of days and wound up on the doorstep of the University of Louisville. They gave me a bunch of tests, let me in as an early admissions student with an academic scholarship. And my reaction to that was to stay so drunk the first semester that I literally lost all concept of day and night. It was just a matter of passing out and coming to, of course, blew the scholarship. Then for the next 7.5 years, I worked full-time, drank full-time, went to school full-time, and somehow got through undergraduate and law school. I don't have a handful of clear memories of that whole 8 years. It's just a swirling gray mass of alcoholic insanity. Spring of 1968, I graduated from law school and took and passed the bar that summer. And my daughter, Dana, who was my only child for over 21 years, I have a wonderful 33-year-old son now, but Dana was the only chick in the house for an awful long time, was born. I quit my job. I hung up a shingle, said, "Here I am, world, self-employed criminal defense lawyer," and it worked. For 10 years, I practiced law with a good deal of material success. Not as much as I used to think I'd had. That's one of the peculiarities of staying sober a while, is we get a better focus on the past. You know, they tell you out here in the world that you can't change the past. Don't believe that crap, because we do it in here every day. And sometimes in a very positive way, and like me, not such a positive way. But at any rate, a little law firm of 10 lawyers had built up around this other guy and myself, and things. I told you how bad my drinking was leading up to starting practicing law, and it got worse. It got way worse. Got worse first because alcoholism simply progresses in everybody that's ever had it. We can't dodge that bullet. It got worse because I no longer had a boss. It got worse because I had some money to escalate things with. And it got worse in the latter years of that 10 years because I used a world of things other than booze and a world of them. But I don't get your singleness of purpose knickers all in a knot, because my story is precisely like Bill and Bob's. Everything I used was something to have some impact on the booze. Changed the effect, increased the effect, decreased the effect, helped me try to function on hangovers. But it all went back to the booze. February 10th, 1978, almost 10 years after I started practicing law, I got full of scotch, vodka, and 4 outside issues and drove the Corvette off the road over 120. It was a horrible, horrible accident. I didn't practice law for 5 years. I spent more than 6 months of the first year in the hospital with half a dozen major surgeries that first year. Lifetime, I've had 15 major surgeries on account of that wreck. Had a young lady with me when I had the wreck who was not my daughter's mother. And at the time, I was remarried to my daughter's mother. Now, I'm not making light of the people that I hurt, and I've had to live an awful lot of amends on that, but I'm also not going to fail to laugh at myself where I've been ridiculous. So I'm going to make one sociological observation. I promise you'll be the only one. It's not in the big book. But over the years, I've just kind of looked around and observed. And I've come to the conclusion that the fact that I was remarried to the same woman probably establishes my alcoholism without further authentication. I just don't believe an normie would do that, jump right back in a frying pan they just got out of. And we do it willy-nilly, drunk and sober. You know, old Joe and Sue are divorced, but they're dating, they'll probably get back together. And it works for us sometimes. It's not necessarily bad. It's just really different from ordinary folks. End of sociological observation. But at any rate, obviously, I got a brand new divorce there for the wreck. The guys had to kick me out of the law firm I'd founded because of the social and legal pressure my behavior brought on them. The state of Kentucky took my law license for the same reason. My new wife had to leave me on account of my insanity because I married the woman that was in the wreck with me. She was hurt terribly, but she had on a seatbelt of all things and wasn't hurt as terribly as I am. And I didn't have a urinary function for a year after that wreck. Lost some bodily functions permanently. Was told that I'd never walk again without at least a brace on one leg, maybe both. Turns out the doctors were wrong. Been sober 41 years now, and I owned a brace for over 42. And about a year after the wreck, the head of urology at Duke University did put my plumbing back together and restore my urinary function, but I didn't know that was going to happen. While I was laying in the hospital, once I got able to have my friends come in, and it was a different world back then. I never had any problem with this at all. Every single day, they would come in and bring me booze and more dope than the doctors were giving me. And I would lay in that hospital bed and say really intelligent things. I would say things like, you know, fellas, anybody can stop drinking when the going gets a little rough. But it takes a man to lay in there with it when the bills start coming in. And then I would explain to him that a man ought not be out there doing the crime if he wasn't prepared to do the time. So just because we'd hit a little rough spot in the road, we were going right on with it. Give me a drink and let's go. And that is insanity. And it's powerlessness. And when you really think about it, it's letting the way I feel and my childish sociopathically demand to change it. be more important than my child, more important than my profession, more important than whether I ever walked, more important than whether I ever peed, more important than whether I lived or died. And I've come to the conclusion long since that after we know what we are, after we have done step one, and we put that first one in us, it's the most self-centered act on the face of this earth short of suicide, because it's a declaration that the way I feel in this moment and my demand to change is more important than anything. But at any rate, I lived for about a year without an address. I didn't sleep under the bridge. But the only reason I didn't sleep under the bridge was I could always get somebody to take me in, and it was often strangers. Had no home, had no car, had no clothes. My teeth were rotting out of my head. The couple of years before I got sober, 2 or 3 years before I got sober, I was in some sort of asylum at least 18 times. I suspect I hadn't been able to remember a couple more, but I know it's 18 times. And I don't use the word asylum to be cute. Bill uses that word in the big book, and my mama used that word. And when I was a kid, people didn't have alcohol or substance abuse problems or emotional problems and go get help. They went crazy and were put in asylums. And that's a whole lot more descriptive of what kept happening to me. I was in there, as I say, 18 times in that period of time. I thought I would die of alcoholism. A good half of those places had treatment programs that were based on the 12 steps. So I had a head full of information about Alcoholics Anonymous. And the little part of me that wanted to live, which wasn't much, but the little part of me that wanted to live knew that the only outside chance I had of living was to somehow get this deal that you had. And I believed in order to get it, I had to somehow change what I thought, felt, and believed to make it more like it looked like to me you thought, felt, and believed. And for 2 years, I tried the best I could in the shape I was in. I couldn't change any of it. You see, I honestly believed that I had taken step one 2 years before I got sober. I knew that I was in a humanly hopeless situation with regard to my alcoholism. But I was so intellectually arrogant that steps 2, 3, 6, 7, 11, any mention of God or higher power was so such anathema to me that literally the little hairs would stand up on the back of my neck when somebody would mention it. Kept running me out of the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I essentially chose to die for that 2 years rather than open my mind to that. In the fall of 1980, 6 months before I got sober, I was dropped off at asylum number 17 in Nashville, Tennessee. That was so far the penultimate asylum. And stayed in there a little over a month. It's time to kick me out and had no place to go, no way to get there. My roommate's family felt sorry for me, and they lived in Nashville and said, come stay with us a few days, Don. Let's try to figure out what to do with you. And I went and lived with them a year. And the first 6 months, I did not stay straight. I didn't get sober until 6 months after I got out of that asylum. But I got better, and I had to get better. Just an example, I didn't tell this from the podium for over 30 years because it doesn't sound believable, but I assure you it is absolutely true. I had lost the ability to use a knife and fork on food. And I'm not talking about properly, I'm talking about effectively. And I was embarrassed to ask anybody to give me any hints on it. So after I got sober, we'd go to the meeting at the 202 Club there in Nashville. And then we'd go to the Shoney's restaurant down the street, and I'd sit there with a knife and fork under the table trying to mimic what my friends were doing to regain that skill. So I had to get better, and I did get better. During that 6 months, I went to an awful lot of AA meetings, almost all of them at 202 Club. And I got to where sometimes I could go 2 or 3 weeks without getting ripped. And they only put me back in the asylum one time in the whole 6-month period. And at the rate I'd been going twice a year in the asylum, looked like the picture of mental health. Got on my most recent drunk in late March of 81, and then one of my pop-off vodka / Listerine drunks. And I have truly drunk buckets of both those things. And this is no joke. I have better memories of the Listerine than I do that old hot, cheap vodka. I can stand the smell of Listerine today, but I can't stand and smell that old hot, cheap vodka. But on this most recent drunk, I was drinking, taking everything I could get my hands on. And April 8 of 81, I believe, I know it was the last day I drank. And I believe it was the day that a loving God that I had never acknowledged, much less asked for anything, gave me the most life-saving, wonderful gift that I've ever had in my life. And that gift continues with me to this day. It was no change of my thoughts, feelings, beliefs. See, I was wrong in believing that my thoughts, feelings, and beliefs had to change. And I've been wrong about that, about everything in my life, all of my life. Without divine intervention, I make it all about what I think, feel, and believe. That's my ultimate reality. I realize now that in 78 years, that old crazy picture show in the back of my head, which is what I call my thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, has never one time left a footprint on reality. It's all a will-o'-the-wisp between my ears. The only thing that leaves a footprint on reality is what I do. I didn't know I'd been given the gift, and here's what the gift was. And I didn't know I had anything until looking in the rearview mirror weeks, months, and sometimes years later. For the very first time in my life, I began to follow directions about how to run my life. Even though I didn't understand them, I didn't agree with them, I didn't think they'd work, and I certainly did not want to do them. And folks, that behaving better than my thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, and different from my thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, is the only reason on earth I'm with you folks tonight, instead of having been rotting in a pauper's grave somewhere in Tennessee for about 41 years. When I was able to stumble, I stumbled back to the door of the 202 Club. I didn't think they'd let me in because I had passed out in their AA meetings and had to be bodily carried out. They caught me in their men's room with illegal outside issues. And a big old boy down there has been dead for many years, Joe Wall. Joe was 6'5", and I'm a little guy, about 5'7". And 2 months before I got sober, I was walking through the clubhouse, and Joe walked up, looked way down at me, and said, "You know, Don, I'm beginning to think you really are too intelligent for this program." And I thought he was giving me a compliment. My knee-jerk reaction was, well, thank God they finally figured out who they're dealing with. But Joe went on and saved my life. And he said, "That's a shame, Don, because we have never really had anybody too dumb for this deal. And we bury you buttholes all the time." And that felt like an icy hand closing over something inside me. And it was still there 2 months later when I stumbled in. They did let me in. I remember what was said and who said it. They said, "Come on in, Don, you're keeping us sober." And I said, "Will you tell me one more time what I need to do if I want to live?" And they said, "Oh yeah, don't drink, don't take, don't go to meetings." But the grace of God, the first 60 days, I went to over 150 meetings. Did not want to go to one of them. It was still perfectly clear to me that you all were religious fanatics. It was still clear to me that your silly little deal of meetings, the group therapy sessions you call meetings, and your myth of a higher power couldn't possibly take care of my complex and unique problems. But as part of the gift, I was able to turn around my brain and say, yeah, I know. But we're just out of options. We're going to go anyway. And you see, I had that backwards like everything else. I thought in order for AA to work, first I had to believe it would work, which I did not. I thought second, it had to feel like it was working while it was working, which it generally did not. And I thought I had to be able to see the causal relationship between A causing B, which I could not, I cannot, and no longer give a hoot. It turned out that what I needed to do right then was, among other things, was get my butt into meeting after meeting. They told me at the same time that I needed to read the big book. I said, well, I've read the big book 2 or 3 times. They said, we know, Don, you've been quoting it to us while you've been dying. They said, the first thing you need to understand is that this book is not a philosophy book. There's nothing in here that you can learn that will keep you sober for a heartbeat. In fact, Don, they said, in your case, you've had enough information about AA for over 2 years to stay sober a day at a time the rest of your life without learning one single new piece of information. What's killing you, dummy, is not what you know and don't know. What's killing you is what you're doing and not doing. And they said, what this book really is a simple instruction manual for your actions. And they explained to me that the action, that is the 12 steps, is the prescription for alcoholism. That works on alcoholism precisely like an antibiotic works on an infection. If I have an infection that's going to kill me if it's not treated, but will respond to antibiotics, I don't need to understand the origin and nature of my infection. I could learn everything there is to know about the infection. If I don't take pills, I'm dead. I don't need to understand a thing about how antibiotics work in the human body. I don't need to believe that they'll take care of what's wrong with me. And I don't need to want to take the pills. All those things are totally irrelevant if I take the pills as directed. And they promised me that if I took the action as directed and didn't pay any attention to the old crazy picture show in my head, that it would work as promised. And again, the fact that I'm here instead of the pauper's grave, pretty good evidence to me that they wanted to something there. Then they told me upon live, I was going to have to get on my knees every morning and every night and ask and thank a power greater than myself. I remember tearfully nodding at them, but thinking, well, that's going too far. That ain't going to happen. But I didn't know I had the gift. And in the latter part of April of 81, over my brain's loud veto, even though I was by myself, I was embarrassed. I started getting on my knees, and as far every morning, every night, and as far as I was concerned, talking to the wall, asking something I didn't believe was there, do something I didn't believe could be done. But I persisted. I persisted. And as you'll find out before I finally shut up, I have come to the conclusion that for me, the 2 most important spiritual traits of all are persistence and courtesy. But I persisted of getting on those knees every morning, every night. And as a result, the twin miracles of the second step happened. If I hadn't had to wait until I intellectually believed that second step, that some mystical higher power would get me out of my humanly hopeless dilemma of step 1, I'd have been in the pauper's grave. What happened was I began to behave like a person would behave if they did believe step 2. And the twin miracles happened. The first one was that I got most of the benefits of being a believer, including staying sober. And the second one was, it turned out that for me, faith and belief are just like everything else in my life. I've never one time thought my way into right thinking, feeling, right behavior. I've had to behave my way into right thinking, feeling, and believing every single time. So as a result of that behavior, faith found me and I came to believe. And for 41 years now, the existence of a loving higher power at the center of everything, the center of my life, is the most important fact in the universe to me. I lived in Nashville 21 months sober, unemployed, unemployable, just doing odd jobs here and there. Happier than I'd ever been in my life. They led me through the steps. Finally got it through my head that the third step didn't turn anything over to God. It was just a matter of making a decision to do so. But I still knew where the complication was. I said, okay, you win the semantic war, but tell me, how do you execute on that decision, pray tell? They said, it's just as simple. All you are committing to do is the rest of the first 9 steps, the way the book says do them, and then immediately start living by doing the action of steps 11 and 10, 11, and 12 every day of your life. And the other thing you're committing to do is when what you want to do conflicts with what you know in your heart is right. And I call it the divine spark today. People call it conscience. They call it moral compass. Conventional Christians call it the Holy Spirit. But I'm going to try to take that next stitch in the right place rather than where my brain and ego tell me I need to take it to take care of me. They said, if you do that, you will not have to be concerned with turning your will and life over to God, because one stitch at a time, it will be turned over to God. Your will and life will be turned over to God. They took me through the 4th and 5th step. I formed a picture of what a spiritual don ought to look like. And I did my 5th step, and I went back to by that time I had my own attic. Went back to my attic, somebody had given me a Timex watch. And I followed directions exactly. I spent exactly 1 hour reviewing the first 5 steps. And I didn't look like I was summa cum laude, but it looked like I passed. So I got down on my knees and said the 7th step prayer and believed with all my heart that that was where, with God's help, I went to work on me to make me into what I had decided a spiritual don ought to be. And I rolled that way until I was 9 years sober. And they were an enchanted 9 years. Despite the fact that I was completely off base on 6 and 7, it was humanly impossible to get to where God took me that first 9 years. At about 1.5 years sober, as a pure byproduct of steps 8 and 9, I got my law license back. January of '83, scared to death, I went back to Louisville to try to practice law by myself. My former partners rented me a furnished room and an office, a safe 3 blocks from them for 1 month. And I came back up I-65 to Louisville with everything I owned in the passenger seat of a 10-year-old borrowed car. But I got back to Louisville and I threw myself into Louisville AA, and wasn't long before I thought Louisville AA was better than Nashville AA. And February of '83, 2nd month I was in town, a man who became my friend, Don Pritz, who's dead now, was due to speak to 2,000 people in Louisville. Don got snowed in out west, and they stuck me up there at 22 months sober to talk to 2,000 people. Recordings went out all around. People started asking me to come speak and do this and that and the other. That same month, I saw my daughter for the first time in over 3 years. 2 months later, she moved in with me and lived with me throughout her high school years. And she and I have the best friendship in the world, and in touch with everybody, with one another every day to this day. Started making money practicing law, driving nice cars. But in the meantime, and sponsoring, just embarrassing numbers of people, rooms full of people. But my behavior in the area of women and finance was very much like a fickle 13-year-old. And it was nothing but chaos in that area of my life. And I worked so hard on that. Those character defects that were making me uncomfortable, I would pray and pray for God to take them away. Didn't realize I was wasting my time. Absolute waste of time to ask God to take it away because I want it gone. And I'd do all of the work and I'd get that thing cornered, say, come here, God, give me a little help. We'll get rid of it. God never came. And I didn't know what was wrong. In May of 1990, something happened that caused me to look at 6 and 7 completely differently. In the first place, the book doesn't say a thing about me working on me with or without God's help. It talks about God removing things. So 6 and 7 turned out to be not where I started working on me, where I stopped trying to work on me, and where I turned it over to God, just like I turned alcohol over to God, where I came back to God like a third step on steroids and said, Mom, Dad, I don't know. I can't ever figure out these patterns. I've been trying to do it all my life, so I know what to start stitching. I'm going to act like I've realized that my job is stitching and the pattern is none of my business. And I'm going to act like that it's not my job to take care of me, that it's my job to help God's kids do what they need to have done for fun and for free because I want to. And I'm going to act like a person would act if they trusted you to take care of me. The next thing I had wrong about it was the 7th-step prayer doesn't ask God to remove all our defects of character. It asks God only to remove the ones that stand in the way of my usefulness to God and my fellows. And I don't know which ones they are. And I don't know when they need to go. And it's not just 6 and 7. That, folks, is the span of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's Alcoholics Anonymous. Very early in the book, we're told, our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depend upon the constant thought of others and how we may help meet their needs. 3rd step prayer, take away my difficulties, not so I can be sober and spiritual and happy, but take them away so that victory over them will bear witness to those I would help of God's power, love, and way of life. Steps 8 and 9, all practical, right? Look on page 77. It says, yeah, we're putting our lives in order, but that is not our real purpose. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and those around us. And in the last 32 years, I've stumbled in that direction, and I have used the portion of the St. Francis prayer of seeking to lay aside whether I get love, comfort, and understood, and seeking to love, comfort, and understand everyone with whom I encounter. I bet I pray that prayer an average of 100 times a day today. And it is magic in human relations. It changes everything. Couple it with unfailing courtesy and with giving whoever is in front of you your entire interest, attention, and love. And it truly is magic. It changes the feeling in the room. It changes everything. It's magic in human relations. And I've stumbled that way. And courtesy is so important. I've come to find that if I am unfailingly courteous, I get into almost no conflict, ever. And I've come to the conclusion that at least for me, and I suspect universally, it is impossible to be discourteous and spiritual at the same time. Those two things do not exist. I'm a criminal defense lawyer, and I have to cross-examine, as Stephen would know, what we call hostile witnesses. And the last 32 years, I have done that, and I think I could find you a lot of judges and lawyers in federal and state court, both up here, I'll tell you that I've done right well at it, but I've done it courteously. Completely different thing. And I've learned that the loudest sound in the world, inside a courtroom or outside a courtroom, is the quiet, loving truth. And then my job, I don't win and lose cases anymore. I'm not that big. I've got a job as an advocate, and I go in there and within the boundaries of ethics and and the law, I present the facts in the very best light for my client, the very best light. I protect that client's rights on every corner, or so attempt to, and had right good luck at it. Turns out God's a little better lawyer than I was. But at any rate, I'm going to close by telling you this. If in May of 1990, when I was 9 years sober and had that good life with the warts on it, and by the way, me praying for a character defect to be gone because I want it gone is the exact same mistake as praying for a Ferrari automobile. I'm praying for my own selfish ends. But I've stumbled in that direction for 32 years now, and I do mean stumble. I don't think there's been a single day, if you'd asked me, Don, have you done that 6 and 7 thing well enough that it'll do any good, that I would say, yeah, I think I made it today. Every day I've said, oh no. I lost the thread and had to start over 50 or 100 times. It couldn't possibly be doing any good, but I persisted and I persist. And if in May of 1990, God had said, Don, I want you to make a list of the best you believe you can have in every area of your life, spiritually, materially, your reputation in the legal community, the awards you get from the legal community, the reputation in Alcoholics Anonymous, your family, your one-on-one relationship with my sweet Sharon for 32 years now, maybe your relationship with your children, the cars you drive, the motorcycles you ride, the house you live in, everything. And I'm going to give it to you. And God had done that. I would have shortchanged myself in every single area of my life. When I'm willing to stumblingly behave like a person who's not trying to take care of himself, but is trying to help God's kids do what they need to have done for fun and for free because he wants to. God has things in store for me that are more beautiful than I could ever imagine. Thank you guys so much, and it's been a real pleasure to be with you. God bless.